Hello, hello.
Podcast 121.
121.
121.
What's the equivalent of like Hobbit years, but for 121? It's not 11D1, it'd be 120.
Oh wait,
21.
I think they actually went over this in
Probably.
the Fellowship of the Ring. Yeah.
It makes sense because the Hobbits surprisingly live to be quite old.
Right.
Yeah.
Welcome everyone.
welcome. Oh, that's what a coinkadink.
Hey.
Gooey, you're here.
Good timing.
yeah, good timing. Gooey, you're the one getting shouted out today.
Yep. Oh, but yeah, flaws.
Whoa, we're just spoiling it right off the bat.
Well, okay.
Yeah.
Character
Just let everyone
arcs.
get in here, for starters.
Character
At the
arcs
very
are a
least.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. The Fendellas, welcome. Modavines, welcome to the stream. A couple of you I haven't seen around here. Modavins, I don't think I've seen around here. Cyros, flaws? I don't know what that is. See, a perfect character is a one that has no flaws, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly what makes a perfect character.
That's
yeah.
right. That is
Because
right.
then they don't need to go on an arc.
Yep.
They are just badass right out the gate, and
Yep.
there's nothing interesting at all about it. Hey, Maniac 7703. Bestial Moon. Hey, Bestial Moon. I'm going to notice your name like in highlighted bit
every time
shows
up.
You know what? I think
What?
Bestial Moon. We're gonna do something fun here, just because.
Doing something
Yeah.
special.
I'm gonna do something cool for
Yeah.
you here.
For any of you that don't know, Bestial Moon was the one that saved our Doki Doki streams and some of our Komi streams.
Yes.
So Komi Volume 2 and 3, and Doki Doki, those would not be that would not still exist for you all to enjoy without Bestial Moon. So
yes, Bestial Moon
thank
is
you
a legend.
so much.
For some weird reason, it is not letting me interact with this in the middle of chat here. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna work on this while Jacob the wings it here for a second.
Basically, I mean, yeah, improv. It's all good. But character arcs are something that oftentimes I feel like isn't necessarily thought about when you think of a character and designing characters for stories, because sometimes you just want a character that exists in a story and they're great, right? And it's great fun and whatnot. And you don't always have to have a character arc depending on what kind of story you are. But and sometimes characters don't even necessarily go on an arc so much as you like come to know them a bit better and they get characterized more, right? They don't actually change. But if you're wanting the character to have a transformation, which you generally want to have happen at the very least for your main character, and if you do it for your side characters, it's wonderful. That can be a little bit tough sometimes because you have to figure out what the arc's gonna be, and sometimes it's a lot easier to tell what it's gonna be than for others. But one of my personal favorite ways for how to determine what the character arc is gonna be is you start with a flaw. Because if you have a flaw, then that's immediately something where they need to grow, right? And the whole hero's journey aspect is about transforming, going, out into the abyss essentially, and obtaining the boon and coming back, right? But it's not just that you go and bring the thing and come back, it's that you come back and you're changed, you're different, right? The journey changed you in the same way that the boon will change the, wherever you're bringing it back to. And a flaw is a very concrete way that someone can change, because like when I think about some of my favorite stories, like a Silent Voice, for instance, a Silent Voice has some plot points that it hits, but all in all, it's pretty much just a journey towards a point where a character can have an emotional realization, right? Yeah. And that's something that can be very hard to do in a satisfying way for a story, because if you think about it, it's kind of arbitrary, right? You could have that happen at any point. You could have the person just be like, I realize that, I'm going to be a better person, or I am suddenly awesome because I just decide to be. And then there you go. But that's not an interesting story. But if the character has flaws, right?
Right.
things that keep them from being able to reach that realization, or rather things that specifically need to be overcome, right? Then that can spell out your arc for the character very clearly. And then it has a concrete beginning and end point where once that character arc is resolved, not only does the character know, but the reader knows, and that can help it be a cathartic experience because it's something that they know exactly when it's done.
Mm-hmm.
But
there it is, Bestial Moon. There you go. You are officially one of our newest VIP members on Twitch. I just added you onto that as I was like, you know what, like, it's something we can give out like very easily, but I very much think you deserve it. And like, thank you so much for being an avid watcher of our Twitch channel, so that you get that. So there you go. Yeah. Almanju, thank you so much for the tier 1 sub for 7 months.
Wow.
Appreciate it.
Hello, Jake-Bok and Cable.
Yes.
Unless you're Studio Trigger, then you can just write whatever you want. Well, yes.
Well.
I mean,
yes and no. Yes and no. Even Studio Trigger actually falls, I would say, to these specific archetypal rules with regards to its main characters specifically. But before we go too far into this, we're going to give our VIP shout out to GUI Engineer, and what a coincidence you happen to be in Twitch chat right now. GUI, thank you so much for all the support, bro. It means a lot. It's awesome having you in the VIP call. Sorry you've been sick the last long while. Hope you end up doing better.
And thank you so much for all the help on like stream stuff and all of that jazz. It's very much appreciated.
You're the best, buddy.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Okay.
All right. So we're going to be getting into why when you're writing a character in the beginning, you should plan out their arc like almost at the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like, you build in the foundational bits of the character, the journey in which you want to take them.
You can do it in a discovery-based method, but when you do that, it can... Well, it's a lot tougher. It is a lot tougher. Especially to have it have something that resolves in a crisp, clear way. Because you can have them sort of just, you discover them, and that naturally, they sort of go on a journey with the events that happen in the story and whatnot. But if you can plan it out, then it can make it that much better for the reader, because they know exactly what kind of beats you're hitting, when you hit them, and they can even look forward to them.
Right. When you do a discovery-based version of a character arc specifically, the main thing that's difficult is, I would say, coming to a satisfying ending, which is one that you've set up. But I would say almost just as hard, but a little bit less difficult, is actually the journey going there, actually building upon the stuff that was established in the very beginning of the story. So if you set up a journey for your character and say you shift focus, or you put them on the back burner for a little bit, or you halt their development because the discovery-based thing leads towards a different aspect of their development, people can end up losing track or end up not really caring as much when the big ending that maybe you have planned happens, because the middle, you just lost them along the way there. But as far as like making a very outline story, having a simple one sentence or one phrase flaw can set up some of the most brilliant character arcs in writing.
Well, like maybe this is going a bit too extreme, but take Zuko, for instance, in Avatar The Last Airbender, right?
Yeah.
One, he's not one of the main characters. Not really. He's not one of the core cast. He's not one of the protagonists. And yet he is probably the most beloved character in the show, other than maybe Iroh, right? And
he's definitely the most beloved character.
Yeah.
It's not even close. No, it's not even close.
Yeah. And why is that? He goes on this amazing arc that would not have been possible if he hadn't been so flawed at the start and all the way through, right? Because it's that gives weight to the arc that he goes on. Like, for me personally, I didn't care as much about like Aang and Katara at the beginning. They still had great character moments and flaws and stuff as the story went on and everything. But it was when I saw Zuko and okay, yeah, he's this angsty, teenager and all that stuff.
Right.
But then he has episode 3, right? And you realize like, oh, this kid's gonna go on a journey.
Yeah.
This flaw isn't just there because they're a one-note bad guy, right?
Right.
It's being explored. And then what we're able to get over the course of the whole journey is nothing short of incredible.
Anytime you add a flaw to your character, it doesn't have to be one that's all encompassed and umbrellaed underneath one similar flaw. And it can also not necessarily be a strict character flaw. It can be a foil, like a specific thing that keeps running them aground character-wise in the plot. Like an example would be some kind of antagonistic force or character, or it could be something that is a mistake that they made in the past that you don't necessarily characterize right off the bat. You just know that Zuko has a scar. You don't know what that scar is.
Right. You don't know why he's so hot-headed.
Right. But when you bring in this character right off the bat, like, I love analyzing the first 2 episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Oh, yeah?
Because it immediately establishes all the characters' flaws, in addition to just doing general characterization. But within those first, like, 2 episodes, or even just the first scene of all the main characters, because I would argue, actually, that Zuko is a main character because he gets perspective focus.
That is true. That is true.
With regards to Sokka, Katara, even Aang, because Aang, I would say for the most part, you don't see his flaw immediately right off the bat. It's more of that you start to get it as the other characters kind of bounce off of him, and they're like, "Oh, you're different."
Right.
But Zuko's
is readily apparent.
Zuko's is readily apparent, and I think in some ways that simplicity, that overt aspect of a character's flaw, is actually the best place to start when writing, because then you go, okay, this is my starting point. It's clearly communicated, and it asks the question, why is this character like this? Why did they end up like this?
One of the other reasons why I would say flaws are very important is that it doesn't just have, like, because the kind of stuff that we're talking about here is a lot of, like, the hero's journey kind of stuff, right? For that kind of arc. But it doesn't just have to be for that.
Yep.
If you want to go for sort of like the Greek tragedy, you can also do that. And for that, a flaw is very important as well. Because then you have someone where they have that flaw, but they don't beat it, right? The flaw beats them, right? It ends up, like, that's the thing that tears them down.
Yeah.
Which, again, sets up the entire arc, because flaws can be these wonderful anchors that everything revolves around. Also, parallels between antagonists and protagonists. So if you want to have, say, a main character and a villain, and have the connection between that main character and villain be really strong, one of the things you can do is make them similar, right? And then make there be some point where the villain deviated, the villain made a different decision than the hero, or whatever, right? And that's why they're opposed now. But they still can see the similarities in each other. What better way to do that than with a flaw, right? It's
the fatal flaw in that case,
the fatal flaw. Yeah, exactly. Have the antagonist be they were just like the hero, but they weren't able to overcome their flaw. And then they're this great reminder to the hero that you really need to work on that, because if you don't, you'll turn up like that.
Thinking about Zuko leads me into thinking about kind of characters that had their very clear problem right off the bat, but actually it was more something where fate kind of dealt them a bad hand right off the bat, and it not right off the bat, but I would say a little bit into the future, and that was something that exacerbated the weakness within them. The flaw specifically. There's a lot of characters in fiction. Wow, you read my mind, Jack Blass. I was literally going to mention Tenma from Monster. I really think that Tenma as a character is one that could very easily be overlooked, considering the magnificent cast of side characters he's kind of surrounded by, with Grimmer and Lung and
Ava
and even in some ways, like, while Johan is kind of a force rather than a character for a lot of the story,
still works for him too.
There's a lot of other characters like that as well. But Tenma's I would say flaw is specifically around his naivete, his aspect of not necessarily being able to look at the environment and the people around him and see necessarily where their perspective is, when he's necessarily being taken advantage of or something. And once oh no, the bros are becoming predictable.
Well,
once the event happens,
uh-huh.
it's something that forces him in some ways into survival mode, where his not his weakness, but his flaw is something that gets him into even more trouble. It leads towards him taking action where he maybe should have taken a step back.
Sure.
Or
taking,
intervening.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, intervening when he didn't.
Intervening when he didn't.
Yeah, and flaws. One of the things that I feel like is great about flaws is that anytime you give a character a flaw, you're also giving them a strength, because there has to be some rhyme and reason for the flaw to be there. Mm-hmm. One of the quickest ways for me, at least, to lose interest in a character is when they either don't have any flaws and it's not done for a specific purpose, intentionally, sure. Right? Or they have a flaw and it's a very tacked on flaw.
It has no reason to be there. Anime is very, I would say,
anime is very bad at
this. Very bad at this. One of my favorite, but also like least favorite ones is I'm a clean freak for no reason. For absolutely no reason. Now there are some where you could think of like, oh, they have a specific reason.
Toradora, but yeah,
But that kind of thing where it's this is my quirk. It is not a flaw.
Right.
There is a difference between someone having a little preference of a specific thing and it's supposed to be a defining characteristic of who they are, versus an actual character flaw. So what would be a good separation?
Well, one of my personal favorites. And when I say favorites, I mean least favorites. Examples of this is Harry Potter.
Oh, sure.
So Harry Potter has a wonderful world, right? Mm-hmm. It's very imaginative and magical and fantastic. And Hermione Granger is great, right? Mm-hmm. Doesn't have many flaws, but she's great. But the one that does have a really tacked on flaw, and I would say it's very telling that the author didn't fully get in the headspace of the main character, is with Harry.
Okay.
Because anytime Harry gets mad, if you look at it, and maybe this is just me personally that it bugged me, but it's something.
Books or movies?
Books.
Okay.
Books. Because with movies you can say it's a bad portrayal or whatever, or something like that, right? But when Harry gets mad, it's the slightest things that'll set him off. And there's very little consistency to it, right? It's something where, he doesn't like Malfoy, so he'll get super mad. There's the things where when someone mentions his parents or things like that, and of course he'll get mad, right? But even things like, the teachers are not treating me as some, chosen one with, throwing down the red carpet for me or whatever and listening to everything I have to say. And then he gets just way too mad. There's getting upset, but then there's I'm angry, and it would always take me out of the immersion of the story. But he still had these great character arcs, right? But it wasn't based around that particular flaw. It was more around, say, his insecurities, right? Wanting his parents back and things like that. Yeah. Someone calls Harry Four Eyes Avada Kedavra.
One of the things that's also exciting about writing these characters in, I would say, a little bit more of a simplistic format is that when you go on the trail of, okay, I want to plan out my character a little bit from the get-go. One of my favorite ways to do that is looking to kind of D&D and writing a PC or an NPC or what have you. But the point is writing a character where you're not necessarily fitting them into a grand overarching narrative. So you can kind of rule out a lot of the harder things to write with regards to characters, like themes and all these other things. Mm-hmm. They're just a character. They're kind of just out of context. They're a character. The DM is going to warp the world a little bit around them, or let them play in the playground of the world, and the DM gets to kind of write more of the more difficult stuff. But when you're planning out your character and you realize that, oh, my flaw is something that leads to a couple very specific, interesting questions. Usually those questions don't have to have solid answers. And I would say maybe when you're looking at writing a character with, having a specific flaw, let's say a really easy flaw that I would say a lot of characters do, and it's hard to make, I would say, as entertaining, but it's a very easy one to do, is one of a coward. Someone who is afraid.
Yeah.
Someone who is constantly fearing for their survival or has specific things that trigger that fear, for instance. Batman, Bruce Wayne, has his fear of bats as being a very particular, iconic flaw that almost never really comes up, but they has a very quick arc from the childhood backstory part of his fear to when they always time skip ahead to where he's badass and awesome.
Right.
But taking it out of context and just having it be a D&D character, a PC, you have a specific character who has their flaw that they're scared. They get scared rather easily.
Yeah.
That's a legitimately tough one to nail down as to, well, it's because of this thing, and it's all encapsulated in this little thing. And it goes, okay, well, it could be, but what if it's actually just an amalgamation of a whole bunch of things, and all those things lead to more questions? The actual exploration of that character's journey along the arc allows for a lot of little victories where you see them becoming less and less and less of a coward over time, but constantly relapsing and falling back into cowardice or just being scared or just having moments where they're a little jumpy still or what have you.
Right.
I love it in stories and character arcs when the character doesn't have the, well, if I finish this goal, this thing here, because it's tied to that one thing in my backstory that perfectly encapsulates my flaw, then A-okay, suddenly I've developed and I've come all the way through.
Yeah. And one of the best ways, I think it was Cyrus that mentioned this, is one of the best ways to find out a flaw is to start from a strength that the character has, and then see in what situation that strength becomes a flaw.
Oh, sure.
Right? If you have someone like say if you've been keeping up with Ruby, right? Ironwood is very take charge, right? And he that helps in a lot of situations, an awful lot of situations, and he's very, strong, stalwart leader. What's the point where that becomes a bad thing?
Right.
Well, there is a point where that becomes a bad thing, and there you go.
There you go.
Right.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and okay, yes, I'm a Jew. So I know you were saying that kind of jokingly, but as far as flaws in, say, Comey, right? That's actually a distillation of just a single flaw and how that can make a very simple, straightforward story. You have someone who's socially anxious, right? They don't really have friends. Well, that means that they probably want to make friends.
Right.
So then you have a journey of them making friends. There you go.
Yep. One of the things that's exciting about, I would say, looking at anime specifically, is a lot of it is adapted from manga, and manga is basically, I would say, for a lot of it, beholden to how well it sells with regards to how long it goes. I would say it's more often than not that the manga will try to keep going as long as possible if it's selling well, rather than having a clear defined ending. Even though they'll probably be like, okay, well, I'll still probably have this point be the ending. I just might make the journey go a little bit longer than normal.
Right, like having some build-ups and climaxes and arcs that are resolved along the way to the ending. Right.
I would say Hunter x Hunter has a really cool example of flaws that are actually strengths that are the shadows of those strengths. Gon as a character is one that I would say has some really, really amazingly just kind of sprinkled flaws that are only really shown when the strength basically bumps up against something where it's not able to be displayed as
a strength.
As a strength.
And because his strengths are so extreme, when his flaws are visible, they're
alien.
Very visible.
Like, it almost feels wrong. You're like, wait, bro, why are you sulking here?
Yeah.
Like, what is this? There's this really just something going on with you right here.
There's this darkness that's coming off of you even.
Yeah, and there's a lot of moments in the story where you think, oh, wait, this is him addressing that flaw. Oh, wait, no, actually he's not. No, this just keeps getting pushed down anytime it comes up because he's not actually addressing it here. One of my favorite flaws that can, I would say, have a lot of dimension to it if it's handled well is just the headstrong characters. The characters that just kind of believe in themselves too much. They go and push themselves forward. They're a little bit reckless. There's a lot of little sub-weaknesses that come with that, or flaws or what have you. But then when you look at them performing in their optimal state, it's quite impressive. It looks a lot like a strength.
Yeah.
And then you have moments where you're like, well, wait, these people don't really know failure as much. These people don't really know what it's like to have a struggle that also defies their critical thinking skills. So it's something where it's not like it's going to be a struggle because maybe they enjoy the struggle. It's like, no, there is no way for you to solve this. You have to think completely differently. And it's like, when your best tool is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, right? And
there's some very easy flaws to pull out of that one.
There's some very easy flaws to pull out of that. Start smashing things that you're not supposed to be smashing.
Yep.
Poor Pito.
I mean, yes, Kirishima. Yes,
Kirishima's a great example. Yeah,
that was fantastic. And if
it was a short little bit of backstory.
Yep. And if you remember, we didn't care too much about Kirishima up till that point because we didn't see the flaw, right? But then they're saying, no. You don't see the flaw because he's been bending over backwards to try and make sure that you and he doesn't see that flaw.
Yep.
Right? And it's there you go.
One of the other things that's rather cool, I would say, about when you're writing a simple character, there's nothing wrong with writing a, less than 3-dimensional character. I just want to bring this up here because I think one of the joys of character writing is writing characters across all spectrums of, I would say, complexity and depth. And there are a lot of characters in anime specifically where within like 2 minutes of getting to meet this character, I've got them completely figured out. Like, they're extremely simple. They're either extremely vocal about their strengths, weaknesses, personality, likes, dislikes, all that jazz, or what it is that they've got just their one thing and then their one shadow or mirror to that thing. I want to bring up actually JoJo's really quick.
Oh, really?
This is something that I think is rather clever here. In part 5 of JoJo's, you can tell that they went for the squad, not family, but also brothers kind of thing right off the bat while introducing the squad from JoJo's part 5. As now Jacob and I have gotten through all the main, characters in the squad's, backstories.
Right.
We are able to look back at those moments where we met them all at the cafe for the first time as Giorno is brought in, and every single one of those characters' flaws was put on display for about 2 seconds, for a little bit of time. We didn't realize why those flaws were there, but it made us immediately go, oh, these guys are all right.
Yeah.
These guys are okay. And we don't necessarily think they're super complex characters right off the bat.
Because since we don't understand them, we don't know the method for the madness, it might just seem like a little caricature thing to sort of slap on them and be like,
quirk,
hey,
if you will.
Yeah, a quirk, right? This is a way that you can remember them and know which is which, right? But then you start to realize, oh wait, there's actually more to it than that. And even if you start with a simple basis, that doesn't have to be the end of it, because even if at the beginning it's, say, one-dimensional or something, you can then start to say, okay, how is this person specifically going to handle this simple premise, right, for them as a person?
Exactly. And it's starting with that simple premise, essentially one word or one sentence for that aspect of their flaw or whatever that aspect is of their character that's going to instigate the arc. You don't have to take them on a full arc just by introducing that flaw, especially if this character just happens to die. And this is a thing that happens in a lot of stories, not just like animes. You'll have a character where it's like, I kind of get this. Boom, they're dead.
Yeah. Like, sudden backstory equals horrible tragic death. We're going to basically contextualize and make you understand their flaws.
Right.
And in a sympathetic way, right?
Yep.
And then suddenly they're gone.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So oftentimes you can have a character where you get them just down to a one-dimensional simple bit, and it's not wrong to look at that and go, oh, they're just a one-dimensional simple bit character. It's like, yeah, now, but I'm going to have this story go for longer than this chapter, than this page in the manga, or than this episode in the anime. And then over the course of time, you give screen time to the character, you give time to the character to maybe look a little bit closer at that and ask those questions.
And personally, I would say this is why books are so irreplaceable.
Sure.
So in something like anime, I feel like it can get a bit easier because, I don't know, let's stick with TV shows, right?
Sure.
With TV shows, I would say that one of the things that can make it a lot easier than with, say, movies is that you can spend a lot more time with the characters, but it's also a lot more often for you to have a singular perspective character and to really get an intimate look into their life, right? If you have a movie, because you have only a limited amount of time, especially if it's not a drama or something like that, then whatever characters you do have, you won't be able to go as in depth, right? Because you gotta spread the love to all the characters, but then also the plot and the world and all that stuff, right? In a TV show, let's say you have a single main character, right?
Sure.
Especially if it's not something where you've got like a bunch of people, like say the bros in JoJo's.
Sure.
You can a lot faster get to the beat of what makes that character tick, right? Yeah. And then if you go into, say, like a book, right? Then suddenly, because books, like, even if you do a third person omniscient, you're pretty much going to stick with one character at any given time, right? And you might jump around a little bit, but there will be characters that you stick with a bit more than others. Yeah. And if it's anything that's not third person omniscient, third person limited, any kind of first person especially, the amount of proximity that you get to these characters and the amount of just how much you can focus on the difference in how exactly they go about dealing with their flaws, even if it's a flaw that you've seen before, right? That does loads to characterize them. Yeah. Because while I could say that, oh yeah, I've got a story where the main character is a bit of a fraidy cat, right? He's a bit of a coward, right? That's nothing special, right? You don't know anything about how that character is actually unique and different, right, just from that. But if you then read like 20 pages from this character's point of view, and you get to see how they think about things, even if there's no difference in, say, the backstory or something like that, right? You can totally be able to tell them apart from someone else. So,
and I would say that character arcs are mostly a thing that is a tool to be used by the creator, the writer, or what have you, rather than something that the writer is beholden to. You don't have to write a character arc for every single character. Yeah. And I would say most stories can't afford a character arc for every single character.
But sometimes you can make it be like a really quick character arc, even for the side characters, and that can blow people away.
I would say that if you have any kind of rule with character arcs, is that there is no rule on the magnitude of the arc, but every character should get a little bit of development. Yeah. Static characters are ones that I think that maybe they're fine to kind of get a viewpoint of what a character could end up being. Like, you get a look, and the idea is that they've gone on a journey already.
Right, so they're sort of the paragon that everyone looks to.
Exactly, but I wouldn't follow a story about a static character.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't even be as interested in a static paragon, because think like MHA, right? Yep. Now, in some ways, you could even maybe say that Deku is like too much of a Simon role, but no, he has plenty of flaws. His confidence and everything, he has all the tools. He has the tools to be able to help people. Sure. But he doesn't believe in himself, so he doesn't actually end up helping people until the times when he does, right? Like, say, All Might. All Might is All Might, right? But the thing that makes All Might so much more interesting than, say, Superman or Captain America or whatever is the fact that we can see those flaws right from the beginning. Horikoshi specifically sets up that, All Might's a flawed person. He's a person, right?
Yeah, that's maybe another thing that's kind of difficult with the fantastical and the science fiction stories. And a lot of times in the desire to build your characters and your world up as being beyond this, larger than life, fantastical, you can end up, not really making a character into a character and more of a paragon, like what you're saying.
Monfernova, Yes, good timing. Yeah. So as far as flaws dictating character arcs, I would say there isn't really a show that I know that does this better and more than Monogatari.
Because that's the entire story.
That is the entire story,
that's
right?
the whole thing.
And the thing is, it works. You can have that be the story and be the entire story. And it's like, even in the fantastical elements, and if you think about it, right, in an ideal situation,
right,
you would if you do have fantastical elements or some kind of plot that needs to be traversed through in the story, you want that to be something that is tied as directly as possible to the characters that are going to grow as a result of it.
The characters are not in service to the fantastical elements. The fantastical elements are in service to the characters.
Yes. And in Monogatari, that's literally what it is, right? So that the connection is about as strong as it can be, and they keep doing it, right? And in fact, they'll be doing it for multiple characters at the same time, right?
And in fact, you'll see how the flaws of one character lead to them making choices that affect another character who then reacts with their flaw, which then makes them take choices which reacts with them making... And this spider web just goes out. And I would say that's probably one of the most engaging aspects about a show like Monogatari, is that you're constantly asking questions about how, but if they do this, how is this going to affect so-and-so? Oh, shoot.
Right.
It might end up having things go this way. But because of how they're interacting with this person, so that aspect also leads towards, I would say, the best aspects of drama and how to avoid melodrama in your character arcs. We could do a whole podcast on how good flaws and well-established flaws end almost all the melodrama BS problems you get in stories.
Because here's my hot take on melodrama that I just thought of.
Go for it.
The reason it's melodrama is not because it's drama, but because the flaws that they establish that are the reasons for the drama are not properly sold to the audience. Right? So if you have someone like, okay, I really like shitting on Arrow, so I'll just use this as the example, because I think it's
a live-action DC superhero
I think it's the live-action Sword Art Online. Basically, you might have something where there are characters that lie, as in they don't tell something to another character that the character doesn't really need to know, right? It's not their business or whatever. The character then finds out that they didn't tell them this thing that they didn't really have any business knowing, and then they freak out to that character because I can't trust you anymore. I can't. You lied to me, right? And now I just can't believe you, right?
I love that I haven't even seen this show really at all. So
it's bad. But I'm sorry if you like Arrow. The action is fantastic. But whenever they would do that with that kind of drama between the characters, it made me want to claw my eyes out. It was so bad. And the thing is that it's not that it's inherently bad. The concept and the idea of broken trust, that's fantastic. That's fantastic.
Right.
And if you show that they have a really strong connection with each other and that this is something that they would expect to be told about, right? And they don't, that's huge. That's huge. Like, isn't Berserk basically like based on that entire concept? Right? Right? That's a big deal. That's a really big deal. But if you don't properly set up the flaws as being something believable for the characters and relevant in the particular situation, then melodrama.
Right. So we're getting a little bit off track here, but the aspect of when you establish the flaw at the beginning, when you're writing the character at the very beginning, one of the wonderful things about this is you just generated probably like 200 hours worth of plot without even really writing it yet. Because a character has a specific flaw, and the flaw is real. It's not something they're just going to get over in a few minutes or what have you, or even a few days. This is something that you can look at it independently, this flaw, and go, what kind of conflict comes from someone having this flaw? And then you put that one out there, and then you see other characters and their flaw, and you go, where does their lead to? Oh, this is an issue that will come up probably if these two flaws exist in parallel with each other, and they're going on a journey. That's why I keep bringing up the D&D thing, is that when you clearly communicate your flaws to the party of the people that are collaborative storytellers with you, they go, oh, that's their flaw. Okay, this character has a really big issue with the swamps. Like, whatever it is, they're terrified of swamps. We don't know why, but there are instances where it would be faster for us to traverse through the swamp.
Sure.
And we have a character that is all about reckless. We have to do the thing, and it doesn't matter what things go in the place. This is a very simple situation, mind you. And character A is like, I don't like the swamp. We'll go around it here.
Now, personally, I would say that that's a bit more of a quirk because it's for a very specific thing. But yeah, like that's something where I mean,
it's still under the coward belt.
Right.
It's
yeah,
still
exactly.
Under the fear belt.
Yeah. So Behonort, I know characters do not have to have flaws. They do not have to have flaws. But there are punches that you are missing out on if they don't have flaws.
Yes.
Now,
that's
depending on the kind of story that it is, it might be totally fine for them to not have a flaw. Being a Mary Sue is not inherently a bad thing.
Yeah.
I would also say that that term is grossly overutilized when it doesn't necessarily apply.
Yeah.
But even if they are, that's fine, because it can be going for more of a fun story, and then maybe the people that do have the flaws are the other characters, right?
Sure.
And then that's where the sort of the drama gets sort of sectioned off into, so that it's not too all-encompassing in the story, right?
Yep.
But so yeah, and then there's also the paragons and the things like that, where they're not as much of a main character. They're more of an idea, a force in the story, whether for good or bad, that has an influence, even if they're not. You don't get to know them as a really in-depth person.
Ping Pong is a great example, I would say, of flawed characters. Yeah, YX Casual. Ping Pong has its character's flaws brought up quite early, and yet I would say the development that those characters go on is not one that is clearly established as to what and how it will come about, like, or what it is and how it will come about. Ping Pong the animation is one where in some ways the characters tend to run from their flaws. They tend to avoid them. They do in some ways what would be the more realistic thing that is less heroic that most characters tend to do in those kind of, I will do the thing, my flaws, my flaw, but I will overcome it, you know? It's more the, no, flaws are painful. They lead to sucky situations, and I avoid those. So when characters in Ping Pong the animation end up encountering their flaws, some of them just spin completely out of control.
Right.
They lose their way completely. Like, Kill la Kill's music is playing, but they've got AirPods in, or like massive headphones on. They're not hearing a dang thing.
It takes some pretty heavy AirPods to stop the Kill la Kill soundtrack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when you have characters that are going through, I would say, flaws that lead to them avoiding them, that's another way I would say to really make sure that the audience is sold that the flaw is a real one, to have it beat the character.
Yes.
Because if it's just one that kind of, it's like a mosquito, I just swat it every once in a while.
Then the amount of catharsis that can come when they defeat it is of a proportional amount. It's tiny, right? And one of the reasons that why you were saying that avoiding a flaw can be such a big deal is because it's a way to actually save time.
Sure.
If you think about it, okay, you don't want to actually see a character go and confront something and try and make progress and then regress and then try and confront something and regress, especially if it's the same thing that they're confronting. Now, we as humans do that all the time. It's a very realistic thing. Yeah. But for the purposes of entertainment and making an enjoyable story, you generally don't want to do that too much. If you do it, make sure you're doing it with good reason and motivation. Zuko at the end of season 2 is a great example.
Yep.
But one of the ways you can avoid it, is by having the character avoid their flaw. You basically are telling the audience, or not telling, showing the audience that they are familiar enough with their flaw, that this flaw is an old enemy, and it's beaten them before time and time again, and they don't want that to happen again, so they just avoid it and don't fight it, right? And that can be a way to build up this flaw as this amazing thing that is terrifying and has taken over their life, and then when they actually go and face it, it's this wonderful, wonderful thing.
It is
when they defeat it.
Yeah, I would say that weirdly enough, the Witcher 3 game has this particular angle on things explored within the main character of Geralt, and I don't want to go too much in depth into it because he kind of comes off as the stoic, static, badass main character right off the bat.
Mm-hmm.
And then over the course of him doing quests with certain side characters, you start to see the certain flaws and or problems that he's avoided for all this time, and then when he starts to address them, it's quite good. I love what you said about having a character's avoidance of a flaw be this thing that leads to more catharsis when they address it. I have constantly tried to understand the meta what I don't even know what the word is, whatever it is that makes viewers, readers, or what have you always go for that super flawed side character. That extremely flawed side character always ends up being the fan favorite of the entire fandom base, what have you. I think a lot of it is kind of a desire to be like, oh, look, they're a screwed up individual that's trying just like me.
Right.
And they can't get anything to go right, but I understand
I believe in you.
wild child problem soul or what have you.
Uh-huh.
And I really think that it's the efficacy of the efficacy in communicating what those flaws are, and the fact that they're not really fighting it. It's not that they've made it their own entirely, and they've come to some Zen wisdom about how to balance their flaw with their every life. It's more like their flaw is just on full display.
Yep.
And yet you can see, usually because of the way the story is written, that, in that specific little set of circumstances there, it's actually a strength. It's good.
Yeah.
It's good. I see it there. And then you have all this hope for the character having that moment where it's switched. It becomes this massive strength. It becomes this thing that they can draw upon, and there was a journey that brought them out of that.
Yeah.
But now it's just a shadow behind the strength being there, and it's a thing that they kind of carry around like a scar.
Right.
You know. I'm looking at you, Zuko. There's a reason why you're considered to have one of the greatest character arcs in fiction. Like, I mean, like at least in recent fiction. Like,
yeah.
Speaking
Speaking of scars and flawed characters and flaws that are avoided, Berserk. Guts.
Yeah.
So, Guts avoids his flaws, multiple flaws, in several different parts of the story. In the Golden Age arc, he doesn't actually even, like, his flaw of not really thinking about what it is he wants isn't something that he confronts until
halfway through
the show, and he's faced with very potentially real prospect of death, right? And then afterwards, if you read the manga, when he's going around fighting monsters, there's something else that he should be doing.
Yeah.
He shouldn't be fighting these monsters. There's someone much more important, but he avoids them.
Yeah.
Because that would be painful as hell.
Yeah.
Right? And they don't even spend a whole lot of time on it, right?
Nope.
But there's this realization, there's this just nagging bit in your mind where you're like, where's this person? Why aren't you with them?
Yeah.
You shouldn't be doing this. You have more important things, right? Right? Are you actually doing this? Why are you doing this, right?
So good.
And when it's finally actually brought up and becomes a point of conflict, when he's forced to face that flaw, it's fantastic. It's fantastic. But it wasn't something that had to be like directly showing how he was going up against it and failing.
Right.
He was failing because he wasn't looking at it.
Yeah. That's a good point, Cycroni. I feel like it's worth noting that a lot of traits that make a good hero make an unhealthy human being. Night-Eye very aptly described All Might and Izuku's heroism as a madness. There is something I would say to relatability in characters and stories that is often, I would say, a bit not, I'm trying to use a nice word here, but it's often a bit kind of criticized by the oh yes, the story, you know, because it's like relatability isn't something that makes the character well written necessarily. It's something that can mean the character is well written, but because it's so subjective and what's relatable to someone isn't relatable to others or what have you, and just because a character is relatable doesn't mean that they're necessarily that deep. They could be a self-insert with like 2 positive qualities about them and no flaws.
Well,
you know?
although I will say, if you manage to make a self-insert that is very relatable and flawed, good job.
I didn't say flawed.
I
said specifically not flawed.
Gotcha.
They're like,
gotcha.
I relate to this really cool experience that they're having here, getting to play this video game. And level up.
Well, that's a whole other conversation.
Right. So I think, though, that there is a reason why the most relatable characters are usually the most flawed characters. And that is that we are viewing these characters because someone decided to write something for our entertainment. They decided to create this world because they wanted to get this world, these characters out of their head onto the page, onto the script, onto the whatever. And now we get to view them for our entertainment pleasure. And yet there are times when the most interesting character, the one that we ask the most questions about, is what I usually define as the most interesting character. The one where you're like, ooh, I want to ask questions about you and have them answered by the future story.
Sure.
Is usually the one that has all those flaws, or at the very least that flaws that is so aptly communicated that we can't help but be like, what are you doing? What are you doing in the background over there? What's going on with you?
Yep.
Sorry, what were you getting at over here?
Cycronia again. You mean Kazuma? So relatable, and also I feel called out. Yeah.
Hey, Kazuma has some flaws. He doesn't
plenty.
know how to speak respectfully to other people, really.
Also,
or he compulsively,
he is
snarkily talks down to other people.
And he's arrogant as hell.
And
it gets him in trouble.
A lot.
A lot.
Yes.
Oh, man.
Yes.
But, okay, now here's a big question from Behonor. What do you do when the character arc concludes?
I'll scroll up.
Should a character arc end? When do you start another character arc?
Character arcs are meant to end. That is the point of the arc bit there.
Although, one thing you can do is that you can show, because in storytelling, and the whole idea of the hero's journey is to be a microcosm of our actual lives, right? Because even if we don't do anything as heroic as going and slaying a dragon and rescuing the princess and all that, right? It's still something where we have to face our own demons and flaws and stuff on a daily basis in whatever way we can, right? And we might have a little mini character arc where we figure out how to, I don't know, like let's say, we're cowardly, right? Where we try and deal with that, right?
Right.
But that's not something where it's suddenly 100% resolved once you do that, right?
Caleb being okay with spiders being around the character arc.
Yeah.
Oh no.
It might be an ongoing
He's going to
process.
go and touch it.
Right. And
I touched it. Character arc concluded. No.
Yeah, no. That's like the romantic comedies that have them hold hands and then the show's over. It's like no, that doesn't work, right?
Well, I mean, those weren't necessarily character arcs.
Well, sure, yeah, but I mean,
progression.
Usually the character arc could be tied into that somehow. But the point is that while you can do those sorts of things where the character arc just ends in a nice little neat bow, one of the things that can be a lot more satisfying is when it's something that continues, right?
Sure.
In the case of Deku, he has made a lot of progress in working on his own confidence and helping other people and all of that stuff and understanding what it really means to be a hero and living an example of that. But just because he helped Koda doesn't mean he doesn't have to help Eri or that he's not going to help Eri, right? And that there aren't still things where he can grow. So, yeah.
Shoto Todoroki is a good example of that. During the exam arc, his problems came flaring up again because, that 5-minute conversation helped, but not enough to undo years of repressed feelings.
Yep.
This is a thing I would say that's rather cool in Critical Role, actually. Jacob and I were talking about this. And we're like, what is some reference material that we want to have in our arsenal before we talk about this? And he was like, Critical Role. because you wanted to talk about how Sam Riegel specifically writes his characters with this in mind. And I would say that if you want to look at a way to write simply a flaw right off the bat and then communicate it, Critical Role actually has a really good thing for that by checking out the beginning of, I would say, at least campaign 2, because that starts off with the characters
at the beginning,
at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then there are specific highlight videos where they'll give kind of focus to a character's story arc. And yeah, there's a lot that can be gleaned there.
And it can also be a wonderful way to see the characters evolve and change, not just grow in the literal sense of the character actually growing themselves, but also the person that is writing the character. You know, it's D&D, so you know they're playing them, but they're coming to a better understanding of the character as they get into that skin, right? And while they do have a very good idea of what the character is going to be like from the get-go, because it's stupidly successful, so they put a lot of time into designing the characters, with someone like, say, not the Goblin, Sam's character, he specifically said that he started with a flaw. She drinks, right? And then it's why does she drink? And then from there, he came up with this whole story of why not the Goblin drinks, and all of this stuff that can be tied back to he plays a character that's a drinker, right? And it works. It really works. And I feel like with characters, it can be very easy to think that you have to immediately have the finished product, perfect image of what the character is with the flaw and all this stuff. And
you don't need that at all.
You don't need to do that, right? But if you start with a flaw, and again, that's why starting with a flaw can be so important, is because it's a crystal foundation that you can work off of. Then you can branch off into those little areas and say, okay, they have this flaw. Why do they have this flaw? Or they have this flaw because they have this other strength, and where has this strength helped them? Why haven't they worked on the flaw yet, right? You know, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, Violet Evergarden is probably one of my favorite ones for that slow burn development. When you think about Violet and her character, her boon, her strength, is that she is a weapon. She is a soldier. She has all these fantastic physical capabilities, but because she is not... something about her is not connected as much with her humanity, she doesn't know what love is. The flaw is that she doesn't know how to love, or how to identify love or receive love. But she wants it. And the flaw is like pretty multi-layered. It's not just that she doesn't know how to receive love or experience it or understand it. There's a desire, though, that's innate within her to understand it, and yet she has no grid to where to start. And also the one person, minor spoilers here, the one person that could help her
isn't around.
Can't help her. Like the one person that would actually have the ability to solve a lot of the initial struggle parts for her isn't there.
Which is one of the reasons why it's so important for the story, for the purposes of the story in the meta sense, that they're not there, is because now we're starting with Violet being basically on her hero's journey, being thrown into chaos, into the abyss, right? And now, like, because one of the things that can be amazing about this, when you really have a character that's lost, is that their character arc won't look like this. One of, like, you can do character arcs that look like this, but usually you want to break it up at least, or there's lots of tricks to make it not seem mechanical, right? Because you want it to feel earned. You want it to feel like this is something that the character grappled with and came to the realizations of and whatnot, and that it
story
wasn't
didn't
just
force them into this.
Right. It wasn't just an exactly based on what page you are, they will be this many percentage points along the way of their arc, right? Like that, you know, that's not as interesting. But if it's something where they're like, okay, I'm on this arc, but I don't know where this arc is heading exactly, because in the case of Violet Evergarden, it was very much a live through the arc kind of a thing, right? Her arc is almost like this, you know, it's going off in all kinds of different directions, and she'll learn something new, and she'll be like, okay, that's good, and then she'll start going, you know, in a different direction with each episode, and
I would say near Noom to having a character flaw does draw out some sense of relatability, but I would say that the character can have a flaw that very few people can even draw sympathy to. I would say there are a lot of characters out there
that tend to avoid this problem because it's one that probably from a marketability standpoint it makes your story a little bit less entertaining. But there are unfortunately a lot of people that struggle with some really dark, heavy stuff, or maybe just some stuff that's just like, okay, yeah, you're struggling with that and that's your flaw, but like I don't find this entertaining. I think it's that fine line of, are you doing this for the purpose of kind of getting that rise out of people, or doing this to actually take them on the journey with the character?
One other thing that I will say is that flaws and events are very different things.
Yes.
Events will be brought about by flaws, right? So if someone has some tragic backstory, and even if it's something that and when I feel like when you get to the events, that's when it gets a lot less relatable, because life experience differs from person to person, right? But the event happens as a result of the flaw, and flaws are usually very general things, right? You know, the person being a coward rather than, you know, say they don't like swamps, right? Or if they have anger issues, the issue isn't that they, you know, they, I don't know, did something while they were angry, right? It's that they have this anger and maybe it comes from some place in particular, right?
Oh, sure.
And then if you can explore that, then even if it's something where the person doesn't, because I feel like with relatability, you're kind of banking on them, on the audience having experienced something similar in their own life, right? So that way they can relate to it, right? Mm-hmm. But if you go one step further back, where you show how that formed inside the character, then you can basically give that experience to the reader themselves, right? So that they start to get this problem with, say, anger as the character does, right? And then, even if they can't relate to it personally because they've never had that happen in their own life, you just took them on a journey, and now they get it. But depending on what kind of flaw it is, that might be something that could get a bit disturbing. So, yeah.
I would say that there's stories where I've seen, probably, and Evangelion is probably a good example of this for all of us who've watched a lot of anime. There are flaws within these characters in Evangelion that it's you don't necessarily have as much sympathy towards them for. You're like, oh, dang, y'all are some pretty screwed up people. And, you know, like, some of them are pretty realistic. Some of them are pretty intense and pretty hard to relate
realistic.
to. Maybe also realistic, but not as necessarily entertaining. And I would say that that's probably where Evangelion probably shines the best, though, is handling these really
it doesn't back
tough,
down from doing that.
These really tough aspects of their characters' flaws. And while, of course, it's easy to meme that Evangelion doesn't have a great, you know, story plot ending or what have you, because it's a hodgepodge mess of stuff where it's been redone with its ending to death. There's a lot of good stuff within certain character arcs, you know, inside the meat of Evangelion, where you go, oh wow, okay, not bad.
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to bring up before the stream ended, and this is something that's kind of an exploration of character flaws rather than a specific thing that I'm rather certain about, or even remotely certain about. I really find that character arcs and the flaws in them can sometimes lead to more flaws. It's essentially that the flaw is not about the character arc resolving well. It's just about them changing. And the flaw is just the key to them grabbing more flaws. And I really like this kind of character arc. I really like the idea of this happening, but I have rarely seen this done well. Like, rarely seen this done in a way where I was like, yes, I want more of this in storytelling. Because there's always some way that it just doesn't really seem to work. So I was curious if you guys in chat knew about something that was like this, or something that is similar to this, and we could explore kind of what that would look like in a story.
Well, Psychronia mentioned Watamote and Welcome to the NHK, where it feels like a bit too real and close to home in some cases, that it's like...
I really want to read the manga now for NHK.
Oh, yeah?
I've heard that the anime more and more, especially as I'm starting to come near the end here, people are saying that the anime had a lot of stuff in it that just wasn't that way in the manga.
Gotcha.
Like it's
and I think even before the manga, there was like a light novel for it, right?
Is it a light novel or manga? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was a light novel that ended up getting a manga, and then after the manga, it got an anime.
Oh, okay. The anime for NHK couldn't show some of the stuff from either the manga or the novelization.
Gotcha.
See, that's a great point. This is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where the flaws that the characters are going through, the conflicts, the struggles that they're going through, are not marketable. You cannot put them in serialized anime. It goes against maybe some censor laws or what have you.
Well, or if you do, like say Sato with his just general
hallucinations.
Yes, hallucinations, but also just the general depression, right?
Yeah.
If you wanted to cover that in like a story and do it in a way that feels a lot more comfortable, I guess, for the audience to go through, maybe you put it in a disguise of something else, right? Maybe that's kind of like what Monogatari does, of having all these supernatural things, or maybe like say a Silent Voice, you put it in line with like bullying or disabilities or things like that. That way maybe there's a chance for some people to say, okay, I can separate myself from that a little bit, as opposed to just the general depression of like living and self-worth and all that stuff.
Mon for Nova, that's a great point. Sangatsu does, I would say, ride the fine line of it rather well. I would say that's probably one of my favorite things about the writing in March Comes in Like a Lion, is that the tough struggles of the characters going on their arcs are ones that aren't necessarily having to be visually glorified in order to be communicated well. So it's almost as if they're respecting the characters too much to show them in these compromised situations, because either they're in the past or it's something where it's there and it's present, but it's not in the actual act of it. It's in the glance. It's in the unspoken word. It's in these specific moments.
I will say, one of the things that Sangatsu does that makes it a lot easier to go into because Sangatsu is so atmospheric, right? That when it does the depressive episodes for Rei, whether it's like episodes, like sections of the episode, or actual whole episodes, one of the things that they do really, really well is they contrast it with the Kawamotos. And like it'll be like Rei, darkness, dreary, depressing, all this stuff. And then you'll go to the Kawamotos and it's sunshine and smiles and energy and life and all of this stuff. So that way it doesn't ever get too extreme on any one end of the spectrum. With something like NHK, because all the characters are dealing with these kinds of situations in some form or other, and it does hold a lot closer to Sato's perspective in particular, I feel like that's something where it does get a lot heavier, because it stays heavy, right?
Sure.
There aren't as many breathers in NHK.
Right. I guess my thing I'm still trying to hone in on, maybe a little bit more specifically, is where the flaws lead to more flaws developing, though. Because the general rule of a character arc is that they start on a trajectory, a course, based on some aspect of their characterization. And then over the course of time, they go through some peaks, some moments, some lows, and what have you. They come out the other side changed. It's not necessarily because we're talking about flaws, meaning that those flaws are completely gone. All that they have to do is have changed slightly. And I personally really like the stories where you have characters that started off with one flaw and it evolved into 3 or more or 2 other really like worse flaws. Because I like writing protagonists, and I almost like writing sometimes more of this passerby, just stand-in character that could go into any story. Like they could be in anything. But it is fun to every once in a while be like, all right, I'm going to dabble in the antagonist area. I
Right.
want to showcase character arcs for my antagonists. I love the idea of the duo protagonist kind of story where they are pulled apart. It's the it's the Red Risings. It's the
Code Geass.
Geass. It's
Yeah.
the what was another recent example of this? Crap.
Well, we have predictions that that's going to happen in Legend of the Galactic Heroes. But
Legend of the Galactic Heroes is.
it seems like they're seeding that, but
maybe
yeah.
we'll see.
But
I'm trying to remember if there's any others, but go ahead.
well, okay,
go ahead.
so what? Yeah, while you're thinking up more examples, what you seem to be describing is something where it's almost the tragic hero, except that they don't necessarily lose in a definite sense, right?
Right.
So it might not end in some crazy Greek tragedy, but
Right.
like it makes me think like Guts in Berserk, where he has his flaws, and he's not necessarily beating his flaws, but they're beating down on him just over time, right? And then there will be these points where maybe some people will come in and help Guts, and then we'll get these wonderful, wholesome moments that make our heart melt.
Right.
But there's the idea that no. He's carrying the baggage, he's carrying the scars, and it's gotten worse and more complicated over time, right? And this boy just needs to rest. But so something like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Or like the forming of a villain, where
it doesn't have to be the forming of a villain. I think what I'm more going on here is the idea that sometimes, like you were saying with Violet Evergarden, you think of an arc and it has to go like this,
right?
But can actually end up just doing all kinds of stuff here. I would say this is trying to get into what makes Zuko's arc so good, because he regresses at multiple points.
Yeah.
But instead of having it just be a regress back into the old patterns, it's where you attack the flaw, but you do it in the wrong way, or you do it in an unhealthy way, and you end up leading into bigger problems.
Right, it kind of evolves and mutates into something else.
Yeah.
Well, in Zuko's case, though, I would say that is an important distinction, though, because I don't, correct me if I'm wrong.
Oh, that's a great example, Wax Casual. I'm sorry. Sorry for interrupting you. Light from Death Note. I don't necessarily like Light's character for the majority of the story, but he is actually a good example of this style of issue. The problem is it's sometimes difficult to separate his problems and his flaws from the plot.
Well,
versus his actual character.
Here's what I will say.
So I would say not really as much as what I'm thinking of. He's kinda on the line of that, but
the main issue I have with Light being sort of the a good personification of that is that most of that actually happens off screen.
Yeah.
In the first episode, he starts out and we totally get where he's coming from, and we see the conflict and we see where it will turn into something bad, right? And that's the whole point of the juxtaposition of you can kill people, but the morality of that and whatnot. But then, by the end of the first episode, he's already got his god complex. Oh man.
What I meant by regress Psychronia is specifically the stuff that happens when he jumps ahead in season 2. In season 2, towards the end, around the Earth King episode, he goes through a metamorphosis because he dropped the mask in Lake Laogai, and then he ends up getting physically sick because his internal state is in conflict with his current actions. So then he ends up going forward almost too quickly, but you think, oh, we've solved this. So then when he gets into a confrontation with Azula again, she uses the exact same thing that he was insecure about, and we realize, oh, he didn't actually advance through all of that just magically. He then regresses in that he goes back to the same place he was at before in order to, continue forward.
I think I've got a great example of the character regressing.
Oh.
Ava from Monster.
Okay, so her problem evolves into other problems for sure.
And it's this wonderful downward spiral spider web of
you're right.
Of awful.
Oh, it kind of is.
And we totally root for her the entire time. And there's the times
it's
when
hard to root for her
it's
sometimes.
hard to root for her sometimes, but you see these points where she's actually making progress, and then nope. The flaws are too deep rooted.
Yes, Baynor, negative character arcs are more interesting to me than positive ones. Yeah, I think that some of the best character arcs I've seen are the negative character arcs. I think that Griffith's in the Golden Age arc is one that's a bit simplified.
Yeah, because it does end with like a crazy
magical transformation of
sure. I was just
literally his humanity being like
well, and also just like
blown away
over a year of torture. I
mean that too.
That'll
off
do
screen.
That'll do some crazy things to a person.
Yeah, I would say that Griffiths is an imperfect example of this because a lot of the stuff that happened that instigated it happening was off screen.
I would say yes, Umbra Moonin. I would say Ironwood is a great example of a regress because it's something where he was definitely struggling with it, right? And the thing is that, and this is why I appreciate so much what they've been doing in Volume 7. But with Volume 7, you show him getting better, right? Because he's trying. Sure. He knows that this is a flaw he has, and yet he regresses. And
his problem does evolve into different problems that are as a result of things that are part of him not fully addressing his original problem. So I think the reason why I kind of hesitate with Ruby characters in general is that sometimes the character writing isn't as consistent. But Ironwood is one that they've kept localized in the story in two particular parts,
and
volume 2 and 3, and then volumes 7, really.
Right, and in volume 7 in particular. In the earlier volumes, it's whatever, But in volume 7 in particular, they've been really hitting that out of the park.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you're talking about it being a backswing and a forward swing, Psychronia. If you follow the even bigger forward swing, I would just still call that part the backward swing, not necessarily something that is even looked at as a backward swing. Until you realize later, when he goes to visit Iroh in prison, that he's still seeking answers.
Right. Regression doesn't have to be
a stopping point.
Well, okay. Regression does not mean backtracking.
Oh,
right?
Really?
Because a regression is like okay, in the literal sense of the word, yes, but in like with the context of character arcs, it doesn't have to mean that, because backtracking is like, we're gonna rewind and pretend this stuff didn't happen, right? Like in romantic comedies or something, where it's like, the person's like, I like you, and then they're like, I was just kidding, or something like that, right? Whereas with a regression, it's something where, for some reason, and you need to, especially if you sell the reason for it, they stop making progress, and in fact they go in a different direction, a negative direction. But they still are making that journey. The path isn't getting erased or rewound. It's just going in a bad direction.
Oh, sure. Okay.
So it's still part of their process. It's just something that needs to be handled carefully.
They're still moving.
Right?
I think that's the point I'm trying to make as well, is that regression doesn't mean that they went back to being some level of a static character.
It's a detour. Yeah. Well, Joel from The Last of Us. The Last of Us in general is just wonderful character writing. Yeah.
Basal nature versus optimum choice. Oh, so the idea of basically because Last of Us is a zombie thing, so survival kicks in, and then the aspects of how do we have a semblance of sanity in the act of just trying to survive versus making the best choice, and the conflict that comes from that could lead to someone breaking a little bit internally. That's a good one right there. Sorry I already asked this, but the bros didn't see it. Do you know stories where there are groups of characters that share the same flaws and go through the arc together and maybe even have different conclusions? I would say that they're almost always going to have slightly different conclusions. I would say the easiest way to look at this are characters that are in a very tight relationship, and their flaws are something that are almost something that's played up not for comic relief, but something that is played up as a part of their presentation. In some ways, I actually really want to think about Bacano in some strange way.
Really?
Is that there are characters in the story, a couple characters in the story, I would say that tend to have a little bit of a confidence issue. Like there's a couple characters where they're not confident in some aspect of who they are, or what have you. There's the obvious one like Jacuzzi Splot, but then there's a couple other characters where you can see that like moving forward in this crazy world is a bit scary, but having a moment where the crazy circumstances thrust upon them allows them an opportunity to then advance in the same direction.
Yes. Right.
It's not necessarily that they had the same problem.
Right. Exactly.
It's that they're then encountering the same circumstance together.
Yes.
And
that's
makes sense.
Right, because if they had the same flaw, they would probably end up in the same place.
Yeah.
Right. And that could maybe be a fun thing to do with like a protagonist and antagonist, right? Where you see how they're the same, right?
They approach the same thing and then both went, that happens a lot, and I would say the more kind of black and white fantasy good versus evil.
Right,
kind
and
of
then they both end up in like
I have failed you, Anakin. I have failed you.
Well, sure, or like
Chancellor Palpatine is evil.
Yes,
from my point of view, the Jedi are evil. Sorry.
But like the thing where you then have them basically dumped in the same prison together.
Oh,
and then they come to realize that. But one of the other things I would say is that if it's something where it's not the same flaw, but it's the same circumstance, I would say that happens an awful lot. One of my favorites is in Sweetness and Lightning, right? Where you have two very different characters. It's also a cooking show, yeah. But
isn't that the one where it's the single dad and
yes,
okay,
and it's they basically both the characters are both dealing with the same problem in their own way. But they, and they both help each other and rely on each other and all that stuff, and it's wonderful.
Sorry, I went all prequel meme on this thing, and now the chat is just full of prequel memes and stuff. But I mean, that is what it is, you know.
Yeah.
Sorry, Sularon, I missed what you were saying up here. Let me bring this up. People are talking about. Let's see what is following this up with. Probably just with in regards to the whole Last of Us. Thing. No, I can't play Last of Us. It's a PlayStation. It's a PlayStation exclusive. So.
Yep.
C'est la vie. Otherwise, I totally would have played it a long time ago. Jacob, you don't want to spoil Caleb. You might be able to bring something from Yakuza up for this podcast.
Yeah.
Topic.
Yeah. So. Not entirely sure how to do that. I see what you mean. I'm just not entirely sure how to do it.
Bloody Red Moonwolf. What is this list of characters for? It says character development, then just lists a whole bunch of characters.
I recognize a lot of these
characters. I recognize a lot of the characters,
and
too.
I agree that the ones that I recognize, yes, they have great arcs.
Development.
Yeah.
Huh. Would making a story where instead of trying to solve a character flaw is viewed differently in that world, let's say one character's flaw is his body is not strong. What if that character looks for another character that covers up for that flaw, like a strong person to travel with him? I guess what I'm trying to say is, what if the people in the world you created do not try to solve their own flaws, but travel or befriend people that cover each other's own flaws? Well, I would say if we wanted to get into sociology and kind of the just general societal building stuff here, people just do that naturally if they're a little bit healthy. You know, you need to be a little bit healthy with this. Just do that without even consciously thinking about it.
Sure.
You just gravitate towards those areas where someone just kind of covers for your lack of a certain thing.
And the way that they cover for it might not necessarily be something that they're happy about.
Oh,
that's a
great point. Yeah.
Like, think about classic, like,
totally.
Like sparks flying, like, you know, romance will they, won't they's, right? It's something where there's chemistry because they help each other out. They're good matches for each other.
Sure.
And yet there's the whole thing of, well, you know, they might not be happy that they have to cover for the other person's flaws and whatnot, or acknowledge the other person's strengths that cover for their flaws because they're insecure about those flaws. Rock and Revy from Black Lagoon are a great example of that, and I love them for it.
Yeah. Have I watched the Witcher series? No. I'm going to read the books probably before I watch the Witcher series.
It's funny how that tends to happen in D&D, almost as if some invisible god specifically made them to be a balanced party. Yep.
Reminder that Chimera Ant is just character arc writing on crack. I mean, yeah, it's
Yeah.
Meruem, Gon.
Killua.
Well, I'd say like Meruem and Gon are like literally paralleled with each other in that whole bit with the character writing of one becoming human, one becoming the monster, and them starting out as either human or monster for both sides. There, you have the aspects of Meruem being someone that literally, I would say, opens up to the connection because of the crazy situation he's in, and finds that love, that beauty, that something in there. And Gon, the one person who could open up probably to Killua and do that there, pushes off Killua constantly with regards to that bit there, because Killua's Killua's flaws are maybe too much for him to be able to handle at that point. It's an interesting,
From Amaju, Jacob, would Rock's personality shift in Roberta's blood trail be called a regression? So, there are two ways that I want to answer this. One is that from a meta perspective, it is an absolute regression, because what happened to Roberta's blood trails, as far as the characters were concerned, was very unfortunate, apart from a couple conversations. Two, yes, it's a little bit tougher, because that's something where it was his sort of plot decisions that were the main thing that were a regression. But yes, as a representation of his own internal state and his outlook on the world and everything, absolutely. And when that was focused on with Revi as their character interactions, because he had switched, that was very satisfying to see how she responded.
cool. Okay. Chimera, and also known as How to Cry for an Absolute Monster in 12 Easy Steps.
So it was a rock slide. Oh my God.
Rock slide.
Oh my
God. What about Attack on Titan?
Ooh. Attack on Titan. Okay, Eren is a fantastic example of flaws in character arcs.
Sure.
Even though he's the main character, I feel like a lot of the characters in Attack on Titan don't get quite as much time as I would personally like for them to have, because there's so many characters and the plot is so intensive and just requires so much time in the story. But yeah, I would say Attack on Titan definitely does it extremely well with Eren, even if you don't necessarily realize that it's happening earlier on.
Well, I would say in a lot of ways, Eren's character is one that isn't given the actual focus to develop until after, like
season 2.
Well, no, he is in the beginning a little bit, and then they stop it for a long period of time to do plot stuff.
Yep.
And there are moments where you're reminded of what his primary motivation is, but he doesn't. I mean, maybe there's a little bit with Annie at the end of season 1, but I'd say the biggest part does start to come in season 2, when we get into that whole conversation with Reiner and Bertolt, the tree.
Then eventually, what happens with Hana is... Yeah.
And then that kickstarts everything in season 3.
Yep.
Yeah, I would say that maybe this is a little bit of kind of trying to break the fourth wall or meta and analyze here, but I would say that Isayama kind of put Eren on the back burner a little bit, character writing wise, until that point in season 2.
Yeah,
he didn't really need to do much more, because the story was moving along just fine without giving him much exploration,
especially in that second half of season 1.
Yeah,
in the beginning of season 1, they were still characterizing him, and there was a lot of good stuff going.
They're introducing him.
You
can't have a character arc really start without a character being fully introduced. I mean, you need to give them the characterization so that you know why they're making the decisions that they're doing. Otherwise, the decisions that they're doing are actually just there to reinforce the characterization.
Right.
That is what it is, You have to draw what you can from that. So, yeah, Attack on Titan's an interesting one, because a lot of the fantastic character writing, in my opinion, for Eren comes later in the story.
Yeah.
Let's see. Princess Grimoire, hey, welcome to the stream. So I'm currently writing a story where the two characters are working for the same general goal, avenging the same person's death, for example, but their ideology and methodology for doing this is polar opposite. Can their arcs ever believably intersect in a way that allows them to become allies, or would they have to be antagonists to each other?
especially in a case where the two characters have never met and are only interconnected through the characters they're avenging.
I don't know, but it does.
Do they have to be ones
separate?
where they've never interacted?
Like, one of the things that could make for a really solid set of interactions, I would say, is if you made it so that they actually did meet each other.
Yeah.
And then they ended up working together, but they're different is the thing. And that makes them clash and whatnot.
Because then you could have there be lots of limitations upon them working together.
Exactly.
Like, we're only doing this for the next 5 hours.
Right.
And then we're never seeing each other
or
again.
One person
but
wants...
you thought the author's like...
Or one person wants to kill the person, the other person wants to bring them to legal justice or something, right? And then there can be all kinds of complications that arise as a result of that, and also you can get to know the characters and how they knew and how they cared about the person that died, because they want to find out from the other person, how did you know this person? Why is it so important that you avenge them, right?
Yeah. I would say another thing that could be rather cool, and this is just a clever idea that doesn't necessarily fit in your story, but have them meet and have no idea who the other person is and who they're going after. And they could just end up talking to each other as if it's some stroke of fate, where they end up sharing a bit of their story, and they're both not talking about the fact that they are doing their revenge thing.
Oh, that'd be crazy.
But they end up learning a little bit from the other person accidentally, because they end up sussing out the emotion of what's going on in each character, and they're like, huh, I sense a kindred soul. They don't realize that they're actually completely opposite. As far as things go. I love those types of character interactions where it's not the miscommunication drama, it's there is no communication, and the drama is you as the viewer having that omniscient perspective, because you're like, oh, they're talking, but they don't know that they know about the thing. Then it's I just think that's a really cool moment to potentially have as just an idea. It might require a bit of logical leaping to make happen, but I don't know. Maybe it will.
Yeah. Okay, here's something I'll say, and this is going to sound absolutely silly, but I mean this seriously. Domekano is also a great... No. Domekano is also a great example of flawed characters, and how that helps dictate their character arc.
Yeah, sure. Even with just the anime,
because these characters are
agree.
Stupid flawed. And it absolutely dictates what they do, and it makes sense.
A little bit more on the stupid than the flawed, but you know.
Well, hey now, the anime was
an awful adaptation. That's all I have to go on.
No, I know, but that's something where, you know, to almost comedic levels, it relies on that. So yeah.
Oh my god. What aspects of character arc do you enjoy from Rakugo?
Well, I love the Greek tragedy aspect of it.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah,
love
we
it.
know that Sukeroku's flaws are potentially all fatal flaws.
Yep.
Even though we don't know which one is the most fatal of the flaws.
Yep. Well, and the fact that they had that whole thing of okay, Bon being worried about Sukeroku dying in the war.
Yeah.
And then he comes back, right? And the thing is, you kind of know that he's going to come back. But then he comes back, but then it's like, oh god, oh no, this is how he's... Okay, all right, yeah, yep, I see why you're doing this show. I see why you're doing this. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of moments in Rakugo Season 1 where you can just feel the development of the two main characters just pulling them apart.
Yeah.
And it hurts so bad. It hurts so bad when you see it happening, because you're like, no, please. And there's this wonderful moment towards the end of the season where you see them come back, and Bon is completely different. He's so different. He's literally slapping Sukeroku around as he's trying to get his act back together. And Sukeroku actually listens to him somewhat, you know. And then...
Yep.
Yeah. I love it.
Lunar, now that you said that, I'm reminded of a bunch of anime where the hook is that the entire cast are a bunch of heavily flawed characters, like Scum's Wish. I think you can tell from the anime for that one, or from the name for that one. Yes, I have heard of that one, and I've wanted to watch it, but I haven't.
Okay. People look like they're memeing in chat.
Yeah, I see people recommending to me some anime called Interspecies Reviewers.
Jesus.
Which I'm not sure how to feel about that.
So I'm writing a character who recognizes himself as a terrible person and puts on a facade to work with other people better. Would him dropping the act in an emotional moment count as progression or regression?
Ooh.
You can pick.
Yeah,
I think
totally
that's a brilliant moment. There's a lot of stories I'm thinking of off the top of my head where great one here. Haikyuu. When Oikawa snaps at Kageyama in their backstory, we already know a little bit of who Oikawa ends up becoming.
Right.
But we don't know necessarily why he dislikes Kageyama so much, or if he even does dislike Kageyama. But when he has that moment and he just snaps at him, I love that Iwaizumi is just like, whoa, bro, like, no, this is not you. Like, stop it. It's those moments where a character lets loose with their unfiltered feelings that you get to choose as the writer whether that was something that progresses them in a positive way or a negative way. Who knows? It depends on some other factors about the characters. So yeah, it's good stuff.
Thank you for the information about that show, Lunar. It is appreciated. Can't trust these guys.
Hey, enhanced Dot Studios. It's going well. Let's see. Endeavor? Endeavor? Kinda? Yeah.
Maybe.
I don't know. Endeavor is a pretty... Like, I don't know too much about his character in terms of, like, the details to really give that much of thought regarding it. Enhanced Dot Studios, thank you so much for the host. Appreciate it. Thank you. I'd say Regression and this leads into the character arc. Then, depending on the overall type of person he is, like how he handles negativity, he either progresses or gets depressed. You're talking about the outbursts thing, right, Fentelez? I believe that's what you're talking about.
Yes, Matthew Bowe, we talked about Zuko, like, at the very beginning of the stream. It was literally, like, how we opened this up.
Yeah.
Yep,
for sure. Oh, awesome, Lunar. Thanks for deleting stuff. I don't know what that was about.
Yes.
But, feel free to ban if people are
Throw down that
like
Usopp's hammer.
Usopp's hammer. Speaking of
Apply
Usopp's...
directly to the forehead.
Speaking of Usopp's hammer, y'all, we're going to be wrapping up the podcast here, but did you know that we do a One Piece manga stream read-through tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific time?
Crazy, right?
It's
awesome.
Like, if you don't know about that and you like One Piece manga and ridiculous voices, you should check this out. In fact, we do a lot of streams. They're all at 3 p.m. Pacific time. Jacob, what do you do on Thursdays?
On Thursdays, I do gaming, which currently is Yakuza 0, and I have been having so much fun. Like, the whole last stream practically was just doing Cabaret Club Management as Majima, which was wonderful. So, yeah, definitely show up for that.
Yeah, and then on Fridays, I'm doing Nier Automata playthroughs. I just finished... I don't want to be spoilery, but I just finished a huge milestone within the story. That's a good way to say it. I finished a huge first kind of like really, really big milestone within the story. And so that's pretty awesome. So if you want to check that out, Fridays, 3 p.m. Pacific time. That's all our streams. Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday.
Yep.
Podcast, One Piece, Yakuza, Nier Automata, and then
my sci-fi novel Battle Lines is of course on Amazon.
Exclamation BL!
That's
Command
right! Exclamation
in chat.
BL. It's a great sci-fi novel, and it's in both hardback and ebook. Link right there in chat, so go check it out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, Caleb just went fishing. That's all I did in the game. So that's the best thing about Nier Automata, is you can just go fishing in any water. You see water anywhere, you're like, I fish in it. A little puddle, a fish.
You think you can't also go fishing in Yakuza 0?
Yes.
I would love to do a mini game off for like Nier Automata
Yakuza is
0.
literally known for its mini games, though.
I know.
I would just love to have you at the very least try all the games I've played. Like,
yes.
yeah.
I would love to have you try Domestic Girlfriend.
Oh my god. So y'all, we're gonna wrap this up now. Hope to see you in a future stream. Leave a follow if you want to stay up to date with all that stuff. And then if you feel like passing along some of Bezos' money, I hear Twitch Prime is a thing. I mean, it might not be, but you know, it's cool. You can give it a shot. Who knows?
Yep.
You get a cool magnet. It's pretty awesome. And you get access to our private Discord where you get involved with the community there. There's a lot of cool stuff going on there. Lots of people to chat with.
Yes, read Comey, Caleb.
See, Comey seems like something that I'll probably read faster or get into sooner than all the other things you mentioned so far.
And any of you in chat, read Comey.
Comey-san can't communicate. Full name? Yeah.
Yep.
It's a manga, and it apparently gives you the sweetest sweet tooth
it's just
stuff.
Killed me 10 times over from diabetes. It was wonderful.
So y'all, we'll see you in the next stream, but until then, we're Semblance of Sanity. I'm Caleb.
I'm Jacob.
And we'll see you all next time. All right.
You must read Comey further, Jacob. Well, once Yakuza 0's over, then maybe that'd be a good time to slot in another volume of Comey.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. It's wonderful.
See,
Just Komika.
See, I wonder specifically with Comey as a manga read, would it be something that I would want to do on stream, or would it be something better to do kind of just on my own time?
I mean, okay, on stream could totally work, because since there aren't too many volumes out yet, you could do it. Like, it wouldn't take up too much time, you know? And you would almost want to be able to go back and look at your own reactions to the wonderful wholesomeness that is this manga. Oh yeah. It's like, I don't want to overhype it, but it is ridiculously wholesome and so sweet.
Is the premise as good as Battle Lines' premise?
Oh, maybe not the premise, but the execution.